did Israel's fall or their sin result in them forever being fallen? Does that make sense? That's the question he's asking. And then he says, no, that of course not. And as the answer is no, he goes on to say that by no means, rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles so as to make Israel jealous. Now, is he saying that if Israel had received Jesus, that the Gentiles would have never been saved? No, he's not saying that. That's not congruent. That doesn't fit with the entire Old Testament or New Testament. Gentiles were always welcome in Israel, right? The Gentiles, there was whole laws that were set on. Even if you didn't become an Israelite, you could live among the Israelites. You still had to follow certain laws. Like if you busted your Baal out and did a little worship, you'd get killed. But you could still live there, right? You didn't have to show up at the temple. There were laws that were about that regarded how you could live alongside Israel and how they were to treat you. There were laws based on if you were, say, an Amorite, and you're like, hey, I see that you're slaughtering everybody in your path and that Jehovah is powerful, and I'm really on board with Jehovah because this Baal guy's not working out for me. So can I follow you? Me and my family, we'd really love to be involved with what's going on here and not die. And there were laws about that. Like, yes, you can come in. You can, there are areas of the tabernacle you could not go, but you would be considered a follower of Jehovah. You were a saved person by faith from any nation in the world. It always worked that way. There were always laws that were geared towards that for the Gentile, okay? The beginning of the church, there were many Gentiles, all those things. So he's not saying that if Israel hadn't fallen, that the Gentiles could have never been saved, because it was always in God's plan that at any time, any Gentile, anywhere could come, whether it was Old Covenant or New Covenant. So now to try to seal it off and say, well, if Israel had just been, solid, then the rest of you guys, I would have neglected you. That's not a biblical idea. But the point that he's making, and he's actually going to talk about his own ministry, is that in this time, in this place, because the Israelis rejected him, generally speaking, right, nationally, because they eventually rejected Jesus more and more and more after the church was born there in Jerusalem, basically of almost all Jews. I mean, we don't know an exact number, but they were all there for the Feast of Pentecost. So the reason that Jerusalem was swelling was so big, because Jerusalem normally was about 15,000 people, they estimate, in Jesus' day. When we think of a big city, I don't know about you, I'm from Southern California, I think like going to LA where it's like 3 million in the area. And so when I read something in the Bible and it's like the city was packed, I'm like, oh, it was like downtown LA. Not really, it was 15,000 people. It's interesting because Nazareth in Jesus' birth, they estimate to be about 400 people. But based on the graves that they found at Nazareth at digs and so forth. So it kind of gives you a perspective of how many, what populace was like in those days. It's not like here so much. Anyway, all that to say, he's going to talk about his ministry. He's talking about all these things and what's going to happen, because he makes the point in verse 13 that in this time, in this place, that since the Jews begin to reject and persecute the gospel, he stops talking to them, right? 3 times in the book of Acts. 3 times, whether it's in Ephesus, these different places, Paul shows up. Where does he go? The synagogue, right? Every time. Goes to the synagogue. He talks in there for like a week or 2, depending on how long they'll have him in the synagogue. And eventually, it's always almost the same point. It's almost always the same point. As soon as he says that God has invited the Gentiles too, they're like, you have to die. We're going to kill you now. We were kind of into this Jesus thing. We were willing to listen to the resurrection. We didn't know if we were super bought into it. But as soon as you say that God's going to save the Gentiles, immediately they say, we're going to kill you. Why? Why do they say that? Why is it the biggest hang-up that they have isn't the resurrection? And we're not talking about the Pharisees now. We're talking about Judaism in general. It's not the resurrection. It's not that the Messiah could have come. It's when Paul says Gentiles can get saved. Why is that the deal breaker? Why is that when even in his Jesus ministry, when he mentions Naaman being the only leper that was cleansed in the Old Covenant, and they're like, we're going to kill you now. Because Jews, especially leading up to Jesus, for the last 800 years before Jesus, basically got raped and pillaged, literally, by every nation that came by the Romans, by Greeks, everyone. And so to a Jew, the idea who had, I mean, they're still under Roman rule, right? Their prisoners go to Rome. Rome executes their prisoners. Rome decides who's going to be the high priest. You ever wonder why is there two high priests in the New Testament, Caiaphas and Ananias? Why is there two? Because one is a political appointee from Rome because he bid enough money to get it. And the other one is basically who Jews want it to be. I mean, for lack of a better term. So they're controlled. Every portion of their life. I think I mentioned this before. My wife and I started watching The Chosen. It's a fine show. It's great. But there's this one part, I just chuckled because there's this one part in The Chosen where Mary Magdalene's like walking down the street, and in the background, you see one of the Roman guards like edge around her and then keep walking. No, my friends. He would have kicked her in the chest and shoved her down. That's how the Romans ruled. This is during Pilate's reign. Remember how Jesus brings up the fact that Pilate mixed the blood of Jews with pigs and then sacrificed to one of their gods? So historically, for the idea that one of these pig-raising, pig blood-having people who've dominated them for 8 centuries, different cultures, could just believe on Messiah and have the same gift and calling that they did, they couldn't buy into it. It just couldn't be. And so every time it gets brought up, they reject that. And they go, no, we're not going to have any part of this. They sought a righteousness, and they never attained it because they sought it by works. Now, these are all parallels for us. We have to be careful as the church, don't we? Because we can be right there with them. We can clean ourselves up a little bit and then be like, oh, I can't believe you're really like that. Oh, I don't want to deal with this. Right? We can think that way. And we can say, there's just no way, like, really? You think you're going to come into my church? Like, I saw you last week. I know how you act. This isn't unique to the Jews. This is just humanity, how we respond when we seek our own righteousness. So what happens is Paul then, every single time he leaves, and where does he go? He goes to the Gentiles. And he preaches the gospel. So we're running out of time here. We're not going to kind of go into the rest of this, but it's important to understand as we look at and as we cover God working all these things for good, right? In the Jews, in the Gentiles, he's not making these kind of blanket statements that there's this arbitrary sovereignty occurring. It's based on the foreknowledge of who would choose him. And for those people that would choose him, he gave a destiny. And now he's working everything together for good for those people that he called that love him and now are every aspect of their lives and every thing, sphere of authority, every difficulty, every whatever it might be, he's working that together to good for them.